What if your wins at work didn't have to stop there? WorkHuman's employee recognition platform is built on the world's largest rewards marketplace, tying recognition for great work to the things that people love outside it. Crush a project? Snag that baking dish you've been eyeing. Hit a milestone? Celebrate with a weekend getaway. With over 1 million gadgets, gift cards, and experiences, something is redeemed for in WorkHuman's in-house store every 3 seconds. Each reward deepens connections, boosts engagement, and helps fuel a culture that knows their work matters and has the receipts to prove it. Head over to workhuman.com to learn more. WorkHuman, a proud supporter of the HR Happy Hour Network. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to the At Work in America show. My name is Steve Boese. I am so excited for today's show. You don't have to watch the news for more than 3 minutes to feel like, man, the world is moving so fast. Things are changing so fast. I'm not sure how I can keep up both at work, maybe even in our personal lives. It is a crazy time for sure, particularly in organizations who are dealing with technological, cultural, markets, society, all kinds of change, all kinds of disruption. We have, I think, the best person to talk about those topics and how you can help your organization, both as a leader, but also as just someone in the organization and personally manage through disruption, manage through change. We have Patrick Leddin here. He is a leadership expert and author. He's a disruption strategist. He talks with some of the leading companies in the world about these topics and helping them manage their way through it. I got to meet him last fall at the HR Tech Conference when he did a keynote along with James Patterson, his co-author on the book, Disrupt Everything and Win, which I see behind Patrick there too, some copies. Patrick, welcome. Great to see you again.
Oh, Steve, great to see you. Thanks so much for having me. Excited to talk to the folks today.
Yeah, we're very excited. When I heard we had the opportunity to talk to you, I said, "Oh yeah, Patrick, I remember. We met at HR Tech and we had a great conversation." And
well, actually, Steve, if you look over my shoulder, that's actually HR Tech right there, and those black and white photos.
That's I love it. That's fantastic.
That's actually us sitting on stage there, and it's James Patterson and myself standing behind stage, getting ready to walk on. And I gave him the same pictures as a gift over the holidays this year, because I thought it was just such a great
he was
experience.
great, and he was funny too, because obviously big celebrity, sold many millions of books, right? Super smart, funny guy. And one of the first things he said to me was, I was moderating, right, and asking questions of you and James during the conference, and one of the first things he said to me backstage was, "You know what makes for a good moderator, Steve?" And I said, "What's that, James?" And he said, "Someone who doesn't talk too much." That was his advice to me. So I tried to take it as much as possible and let you guys shine. But Patrick, am I wrong or am I right about sort of setting up the conversation with, I feel like the waves of disruption and uncertainty seem more acute now than even in 3, 4, 5 years ago. Is that your sense of it as well?
Yeah, that is my sense of it. I don't think when we started studying disruption, we would really know how big the word would be these days, because it is everywhere. And as you were going through the list, Steve, in the introduction, saying, well, turn on the news for 3 minutes and you'll hear all these different things, or walk around work and you see all these things. The anxiety level starts to go up and people, my goodness, look at all that's going on. So yeah, my premise would be that I would imagine that there's no doubt that our ancestors go back generation after generation after generation, dealt with disruption in their own world. I'm not naive enough to think that they didn't. And it would certainly be extremely disruptive if historically we were able to go over here and get food, or go over there and get water, and then something happens along the way that changes that, or someone gets killed in the process of doing one of those things, right? Extremely disruptive. So I don't want to disrespect what they all experienced, but I think there's something specifically unique about what we're experiencing as far as we're such a, globalization is here. You see it in supply chains, you see it with COVID, you see it with all these different things. Yeah. Technology is moving so rapidly, as you know, you do so much work in that space. It's changing so quickly that literally you feel like I could go to bed in one world and wake up in another one tomorrow. And anecdotally, when I'm out talking to audiences about this or working with executive teams around it, I will ask them, hey, on a scale of 0 to 5 or 0 to 10, how much disruption are you dealing with right now? Inevitably, you get the 4s and 5s and 10s on the scales of 1 to 5. And on the scale of the 10, you're getting people going 20 because they're dealing with it a lot. And then I'll follow up and say, do you think it's going to get calmer or more chaotic in the next 6 months, 12 months, 18 months? And even the people who say, I'm kind of low on the scale, they'll say it's going to get more chaotic. So we're feeling it, and feeling's kind of the place where you start.
Yeah, Patrick, I think you're right about that. Like been around the business world a long time and navigated myself and companies I was with through various waves of disruption, right? And I did feel like there certainly were there, much as you say, going back through history, right? There was always been disruption, and I'm certain when the first folks encountered things like the steam engine and electricity, right, powering the factory, right? Those were, oh my gosh, like what are we going to do? Kinds of things. And maybe I'm wrong, but I felt like many of those prior disruptions that we've worked through played out over time. You maybe had a little bit more time to prepare for them. You had a little bit more time to react to them, to understand them. I remember, I feel like for a long time, the advice was given to leaders like, hey, don't be on the bleeding edge of XYZ, right? Be the next wave, wait it
Hmm.
out, see what happens. And I'm not sure, is it even just faster than before too, in leaders not having as much time to strategize and react?
It's a really great question. You and I were talking earlier. I believe you said you're in the Midwest, and I grew up in
Mhm.
the Midwest. And I remember as a kid, everything kind of started on the coasts in the United States. So wherever people are listening to this from around the world,
Yeah,
they probably know there's places where the kind of the fashion trend started or whatever it might be, the cultural trend started, and then they worked their way to where you lived at. And
yeah,
for us, it started on the coast. It would start on the East Coast or the West Coast and kind of work its way into middle America. And it is a little bit like you're standing at the water watching the waves come in and you have a time to kind of time it and realize, okay, I need to turn the surfboard around right now and ride this wave. But now it's just one after another, and they don't necessarily come all from the same direction. They come from all over the place. The cultural shifts or the fashion trends are popping up everywhere these
mhm,
days, and the same
yeah,
thing with the waves are coming from everywhere. And I do think we're kind of experiencing that. So when you think about adoption or innovation, you will typically see that process that says, well, some people are on the bleeding edge and some people are fast followers and others are laggards that are further
yeah,
down the trail. But I think that everybody is kind of nudging their way up that continuum, whether they necessarily want to or not.
right,
It's the reality that as disruption comes more rapidly and technology advances more, the expectations among employees and among customers and just among any stakeholder in a business begin to escalate as well.
mhm,
And you'll see that where things that in the past were kind of cutting edge ideas are now table stakes.
yeah,
And it doesn't take long for something to quickly become table stakes. I like to say it this way: it's the ones that are going to do extremely well over the course of time are the ones who can redefine what extraordinary looks like
mhm,
faster than anybody else.
yeah. Yeah,
And
and I think that's a great point, Patrick, right? Because it's happening faster and faster, right? Obviously the simple example and the one that's on everybody's mind is AI and how AI is kind of taken over so much of the conversation in organizations and in tech organizations. Certainly, it really wasn't that long ago, right? When these really disruptive technologies were introduced. We're really talking about just a couple of years. And now it's kind of, the number of, I love those stories you read about how many times a certain word is said in corporate earnings call transcripts, right? With
mhm.
CEOs and CFOs, right, giving the earnings call. And all of a sudden, generative AI is mentioned 25,000 times, right, in a given year, when 2 years ago it was never mentioned hardly at all, right? And so I think everybody recognizes now, certainly leaders, right, of organizations recognize, hey, this is what's happening and I've got to face this. But how do you fight against, or how do you advise against sort of wanting to, oh my gosh, this is a lot. I want to avoid some of this. I like, you can't take it all on, right? If that makes sense. Like, I
Mhm,
guess
mhm.
my question is, how do you avoid being overwhelmed, right, as a leader, and then throughout the organization by some of this?
Well, it's interesting when we talk about disrupt everything, and the book is called Disrupt Everything and Win.
Mhm.
It becomes pretty clear to people at some point when I'll say something like, "You notice we didn't call it change everything and win."
Right.
And there's a
That's true.
difference between changing everything in my mind and disrupting everything, because sometimes the most disruptive thing you can do is say no to change. So there's a really key part that
Mm,
says, sometimes I'm going to say yes to change and I'm going to run where all my competitors or the rest of the industry is going or whatever the customers are asking for or my employees. And other times I'm actually going to say no because if we chase that thing,
right.
we forget who we are. So, and in both cases, that could be disruptive. Going toward change is certainly
Hmm.
disruptive to people. You're
Yeah.
changing things. Saying no to it when people feel like, oh, we should go do that can be disruptive as well. So I want to give people a little bit of agency as they think about it to say, you know what?
Yeah.
Disruption doesn't mean change everything. The second thing is so that if it doesn't mean change everything, it means change some things.
Mhm.
and which things are the ones to change. And this is why people get paid the big bucks, is try to figure
Right.
out, which
That's
ones do I
hard.
change? Which ones do I leave alone? I would say that if there's certain things that you would want to leave alone or double down on or recommit to are things that are part of the ethos of your organization. The values you've committed to, maybe the long-term mission or vision you're trying to achieve, why you have a why in the first place. These are really critical things. But then there's other things where you say, these are enablers of that better why. And I need to explore those disruptions. So
Mhm.
you're right. Sometimes people in the face of disruption, they'll freeze,
Yeah.
they'll just pause, they'll get stuck. Sometimes they fight and they push back on it. Sometimes they flee. What that shows like in organizations is people quit and leave. Sometimes they
Mhm.
quit and stay, which is even worse.
Yeah.
Sometimes they kind of fawn because it feels uncomfortable. So they start just kind of trying to ease the temperature a little bit. In the process, they kind of ignore what's actually going on. And sometimes they fold. They just give in, whatever, it's
Yeah.
going to happen. So I'm a cog here in the system. And what we don't want people to do is any of those F words there. We want
Mhm.
them to focus. We
Uh-huh.
want them in those moments of disruption to say, okay, what's going on here? What should I do? What's the organization trying to achieve? What is the organization asking me to do? What do I feel compelled to do? And reconcile those things through what we call discerning, which
Mhm.
is basically saying, okay, what role should I take on in this moment? Should I say yes to it? Should I say no to it? Should I do it on my own? Should I do it with others? Should I get some more information and help them think through those type of steps? And that's exactly what I do with whether it's working with an individual who comes up to me.
Mhm.
I've had those come up and say, AI is changing my job and I'm really
Yeah.
nervous about it. I had one not that long ago. It just stuck in my mind so strongly. He came up and he said, I think I'm going to lose my job because of AI. And I said, "Oh, tell me what's going on." He said, "Well, I'm a writer. I write
Mhm.
I write copy for my companies like marketing web pages and things like that. I even
Yeah.
write speeches the CEO gives." And he said the CEO just gave a speech that was probably 80% Chat GPT generated.
Wow.
Am I going to lose my job? And I said to him, I said, well, yes, you might lose your job because one thing about being a positive disruptor is you don't avoid it. You go look at it for what it is. And then you
Right.
say, yes. I said, yeah, you might lose your job. But before you leave or work on your resume or whatever, fold or whatever it
Mhm.
might be, do you think there's a way that in the face of AI existing, you could be more valuable, not less valuable to your company?
Mhm.
And he said, yeah, I think I could. I said, okay, which of these roles should you take on? So it's all
Yeah.
about discerning what to do, whether it's discerning individually for your own career or discerning as an executive team. What we don't want people to do is just go, I'm going to ignore it and hope it goes away because it probably
Right.
won't. You mentioned AI, Steve, and I've had people who say to me, kind of essentially, they're saying, I'm X years old. I can wait this one out. It's like,
Mhm.
I don't think so. I don't think you could. It's moving really fast. And it's not, is AI, people are in their minds saying, well, is AI, is that like the internet being created and people are creating web pages and you better get on board and get involved? Or is it,
Mhm.
for those who might remember, is it the Y2K bug, which
Yeah.
turns out to fizzle into nothing? Which one is it? And
Mhm.
I would say, I think it's more the internet than the Y2K bug. So you better
Yeah.
figure this disruption out.
Yeah, gosh, I'll do someday as an aside. I'll do like a whole Y2K bug show. I remember it. I'm old enough to remember it pretty well, like what I was doing at the time. And oh my gosh, what what a colossal train wreck some of that
Yeah,
was.
I think that was one of the few times I've actually stayed up till midnight on New Year's Eve because I wanted to
Yeah,
see everything not work.
I know we did. But yeah, I'd agree with you, Patrick, though, because I can even remember a couple of previous technological waves of disruption, certainly where even folks who were experienced in the organization had a lot of institutional knowledge, right? Which is super valuable. If they were slow to embrace things like personal computing and things like sort of digital communication and digital publishing and some of the things we were doing at the time, they they got left behind. They didn't necessarily lose their jobs over it, but they became um, less important, right? Honestly, less influential in the organization. They were left out of conversations. They were left out of exciting projects. They were just left out. And the
Mhm.
folks who were willing to dive in and embrace and learn and adapt, they continued on, and many of them really thrived. And I think that's probably, I mean, the baseline advice I'd give anybody right now in an organization who's like that person who came up to you to talk about the AI disruption.
Yeah, you become less relevant, right,
Yeah.
in the conversation. And let's face it, most conversations that happen about us or about someone else in the organization when it comes to their career advancement or their promotions, things like that, they're not in the room. You're not in the room when that conversation happens.
Right.
That's just how it typically happens. It happens about you, not
Yeah.
with you. So that means that you need to be relevant and your value needs to be seen. So that is carried into the conversation. And that's just for like individual
Yeah.
success, right? But you go beyond that to just organizationally, what are the conversations in the marketplace going on about your business or your entity or your nonprofit or your governmental organization? And how are those conversations saying that you're falling behind, or are those conversations saying you're on top of things?
Mhm.
And it's a real. I spoke at this, and I've made some friends with people who are at the event. I spoke at this event for corporate board members, and it's kind of interesting to hear what they're concerned about and talk to them more because obviously they're concerned about governance and ethical related issues, and are we putting ourselves at risk in the process of all that? And then you talk to
Mhm.
CEOs and senior leaders, and they're thinking about where do we make our strategic bets. And
Yeah.
you think about individual contributors and saying, where's my job going? Everybody's thinking this thing through at their own level
Yeah.
about what it means to, for lack of a better phrase, it's kind of corny, but what's it mean to, thrive, not just survive in this
Yeah.
particular moment.
Yeah, sure thing. I mean, and I don't want to lose sight of that. I think that's super important inside organizations, both for individuals and for the health of the organization, right? It can't be just about what do I got to do today to make sure I don't lose my job, right? I mean, of course, that's the very practical matter facing lots of people and they worry about, and they rightly should. But man, just that baseline survival, man, that's not good for you. It's not good for your long term mental health. It's not good for the organization either. If 2/3 of the employees are just trying to, you know, hold on to the floating, piece of wood in the after the Titanic's gone down kind of thing, right? And some of this is communication too. One of the other topics I wanted to talk to a little bit from a leadership perspective and how it flows throughout the organization is in these times of uncertainty, in these times of disruption where leaders really are faced with, hey, having to figure out where to make these strategic bets, where to embrace, maybe where to pull back from.
Mhm.
What kind of things come up now with what are we telling employees who are worried, right? Like that person you spoke to, right? About the marketing copywriter, that person has a manager and they have a director and they have a VP, right? W- What are the kinds of things you're working with in terms of helping leaders communicate through these times? Is it just, hey, be transparent, be honest, and let the chips fall where they may? Is it more nuanced than that?
I think it's a little more nuanced than that, in that when I think about leadership, and I've seen it throughout my career in my own experiences as a leader, is that there's always these tensions going on, right? And being in a leadership role oftentimes is navigating tension. You think about it as your first role leading a team. Is it, do I lean in? Do I help them through every task? In which
Hmm.
can become micromanagement? Do I
Sure.
pull back and kind of keep a distance from them? And if I do so, at some point, will they feel abandoned by me? And even though I call it empowerment, there's that dynamic going on. Can they be my friends, or are they right now am I now their leader? And even though I used to be their colleague, so
Hmm.
there's all these tensions, and
Yeah.
you start to experience them pretty early on, and they keep going on, and they don't stop. They keep going. So when you talk about what should leaders do and senior leaders do, what am I seeing them do around communication? There's 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 a challenge there in regard to what you can and cannot tell, and when you can and cannot tell it. So I think if there's some things that you feel like employees are asking for, or they'd like to know, or you'd even want them to know to help make better decisions, you try to lean into those moments and be very candid and say to them, there's some things I can't tell you right now. As
Yeah.
soon as I can tell you, we'll have that conversation. But until then, I just can't. I think there's value in doing that. Being candid and direct and open like that. I think it's okay to. I think it's not okay. It's beyond okay to do that, and also to be open for questions and answer as much as you can. I think there's other times though, as a leader, where you have to say, okay, why am I being too forthright or open in this moment? And there's a discussion that's going on there in general about out there in general about vulnerability. And I think
Mhm.
vulnerability is a very good thing. I think it's good for leaders to, show that they're not perfect and to be open that they don't know how to do things. But the question becomes, what are we being vulnerable to? What end state? Am I being vulnerable because I feel like I need to go in there and have a open conversation with my people to make me personally feel better?
Right.
Or do I need to be in there to have this conversation to help them pursue whatever it is we're trying to pursue collectively? In other words, if I go in and I say to them, I'm not exactly sure how to do this, but as a team, I think we need to work our way through it.
Mhm.
That's a way where I'm being open and vulnerable to them to accomplish something
Yeah.
that's valuable to them,
Yeah.
as opposed to if I just go in there because I feel like I need a therapy session with my team.
Yeah.
That might be something you could do differently in different ways. So I think there is that tension of like, what do I share? What do I not share? What am I open to talk about and not open to talk about? I think at the end of the day, if you look at it through the lens of what's best for the team, it can be helpful to the team. When I started teaching college, so I've been a professor at Vanderbilt for 12 years. And when I started teaching college, I actually started teaching at a place called University of Kentucky. And I remember reading this article it said, here's what new professors deal with, or new teachers deal with, or new
Okay.
facilitators or presenters. And they said there's kind of like three levels of concern they go through. And the first level of concern is essentially, do I look the part? Do I look all right? Am I standing up here? Do I look foolish? Am I dressed right? Am I carrying
Right.
all those type
Sure.
of things? They're um, very shallow, quite frankly, but they're all kind of important because if you feel like I'm not looking right, people might not even listen to me. That's what's going through
Right.
our heads.
They may tune you right out if they say, "Well,
Yeah,
who's this
exactly.
fool
Yeah,
up there?"
that's
Right. Right.
exactly. Then the
Yeah.
next step beyond that is, do I know my stuff?
Yeah.
Before after I make sure I'm like dressed appropriately, do I
Mhm.
know my stuff? Do I know the content? And then the third thing is, are they actually learning? And what the article is saying is like, that's completely backwards. You shouldn't be
Mhm.
worried about those things. You should be worrying about, are they learning? And
Yeah.
I think about that same type of approach when I think about working with teams or working with leadership and helping them think through these moments. I say, get beyond the point of, do you look the part? And get beyond the point of, do you know all the answers? And just focus
Mhm.
in on, are you giving them the information they need to make informed decisions? Because it's almost a little bit like every time I don't give that, I'm taking choices off the table for them, and I have to trust that my people are going to make some of the best choices. There was this article in Harvard Business Review years ago. It was called "Who's Got the D?" And it was just talking about how organizations executing strategy will bottleneck if they don't have the decision authorities at the right level, if
Right.
they try to keep it all up at certain levels. And if you're not giving people all of the information to make informed decisions that you can give them, it's almost like you're crippling their decision making authority. So, how do we push it out there in appropriate ways? I think that's a tension people need to navigate.
Yeah. And I think it's probably going to be more important in times in uncertainty and in disruption. You might feel forced to act faster, right? And
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
drive decisions closer to where they need to be and empower people to act faster. And some of it's cultural too. This is a weird example, but I was just reading a piece about, hey, what's it like to work in Germany, right? It was a American person gone off to work with some big German company, and they were talking about, at least in their experience, right? Pushing the envelope, taking risks, all those, embracing change was not rewarded one bit, right? They were very hierarchical. They were very hidebound in some ways. And they were very, you know, don't take a really risky decision. If you're the person who points out the four reasons why this might be a risky decision, you'll be more rewarded versus the person who's driving to the decision. And that was maybe a bit of an extreme example and a bit of an outlier. But I do think there are organizations, I know I've worked in a couple of them, that the default is slow. It's conservative. It's not push, right? And I think in these times, particularly for leaders, that's got to be one of the challenges too, to say, hey, that might have worked for us, even if we're a 100-year-old company, perhaps, right? And because it can be easy to say, hey, we've made it for 100 years being really successful at XYZ thing we do. Now we have to operate a whole lot differently. I don't believe that, right? And I don't know. That could be a recipe for problems too in
Yeah,
organizations.
I think every organization, and people know it as they listen to us, every organization has its own cadence, its own
Yeah.
rhythm of how it goes about doing things and the speed it works at. And we usually don't pick up on the cadence of the organization we're in until we either first show up at it and we're like, wow, this is really fast, or wow, this feels kind of slow compared to
Yeah.
what I was at before. And then we start to get used to it. It's kind of like, fish discover water last. You're in it all the time and you feel that rhythm until either you leave that organization, go someplace else, or you have a opportunity to work in a different culture, a different part of the world, or or a different organization, even a different industry that moves at a different pace. So I
Yeah.
would suggest that first of all, is being attuned to that, Steve, is really, really important because it is real when you bump up against other entities and you feel the move that they're moving at. But I would also, in general, say that when we're in moments of disruption, it can feel very crisis-like. And when crisis happens, as our heartbeat goes up and we start to sweat and we move, we feel like time is of the essence because it often is.
Mhm.
But I think one of the things we need to do is we think about moments is, am I just feeling like I need to move faster right now? Or do I really need to move faster right
Mhm.
now? And
Mhm. That's a
sometimes,
great distinction.
sometimes our emotions can make us feel like we need to move faster. People start to look at us more because they're like, "What are we going to do, boss?" Because in
Yeah.
moments of disruption, we deal with ambiguity, and ambiguity makes people kind of freeze sometimes too. So I think that what we need to say to ourselves is, okay, one is, do I need to move faster, or do I really need to move faster, or do I feel like I need to move faster? And then secondly is to say, is this one of those moments where actually slow is fast? which is those moments where you say, you know what, if I spend the time thinking this through a little bit more, will I save a lot of rework and problems and all these other issues I could run into? And I think that's, that's part of being mature. And not that
Yeah.
I do it all the time. I get caught up in things as well.
Sure.
But I taught a
It's hard
class of
not to.
Andy. Oh, sure. I taught a class of Andy for years called Leading Business Through Times of Crisis, which I think I didn't know it was doing it for me, but it was really preparing me well for this type of experience that I'm going through with this disruption content.
Mhm.
Because I would bring in, we had one section of the class, Steve, it was crazy, crazy cool. We had different guest speakers come in, and I'll just give you like one example, but it was like
Sure.
this every class session. So we'd write unique case studies with these people only for that class. It would never go anyplace else. So these case studies exist just in a couple places. They don't go anywhere. And they'd come in and they'd just be a little unvarnished and share with the students. So imagine 25 students in a room. In walks Doug Parker, the CEO of American Airlines, and Sarah
Wow.
Nelson, the president of the Flight Attendants Association. And they sit down together in front of 25 students and talk about how the airline industry, labor and management work through times of disruption. It was like one after another, right?
Wow, that's
It
cool.
was a master class. I
Yeah.
can't imagine having that moment as an undergraduate student, which is what the students were. Great experience. Well, the one guy, Doug Parker from American Airlines, he said this line that stuck with me. He said, "A crisis is never the time to start making introductions." And I was like, that's
Mm.
brilliant. Because what he was saying, obviously, is, when COVID hits as a CEO of an airline, I better know all the other CEOs. I better know the legislators. I better know the people who are in charge of labor. I better know these people really
Right.
well. But I think about it even in different ways in moments of disruption or uncertainty where it's like, gosh, it's not the time to start introducing myself to myself. I better know my strengths. I better know how I handle pressure. I better be willing to talk about it and spend some time reflecting on it. I better not be now introducing myself to the team. We should know each other and my
Right.
boss and my stakeholders. These are investments I need to be making every day that will help me to better discern in those moments of disruption.
Patrick, that's a great story and a great example that gets me to I think the last thing I wanted to ask you, which is a little bit about preparation and anticipating change. While we can't anticipate often the specific nature of the disruptions that might be heading our way, like very few people knew, say, generative AI, chat GPT type things was coming before it arrived. A few
Hmm.
people did. People were working on it, I
Yeah,
suppose,
working on it.
but
Yeah. Mhm.
most of the rest of us didn't. But we could, in some way, I think, better prepare ourselves. And that example you gave from American Airlines was great. One of the ways to prepare is to make sure you've got good relationships with all your key, right, stakeholders in your environment. But are there other things you work with organizations of, hey, we can't know specifically perhaps what's coming next, but here's some advice to better prepare yourself so when the next big thing hits you, you're better prepared to deal with it.
Yeah, that's actually where I spend most of my time these days, Steve. You
Okay,
and I were talking ahead of
awesome.
time. I said I travel pretty much every week. I usually work with senior leadership teams. Will bring me in and I basically go through three steps of a conversation with them, which is one is, all right, let's scan the macro environment. What are the issues going out there? And of course, I have my own little tools I use for it, but anybody
Sure.
can think it through like what's going on demographically, what's going on with information and technology, what's going on with the labor force, what's going on with, list all the different things. And what are the challenges or things you're hearing about out there? What are the disruptions kind of on the horizon? And
Hmm.
they can start coming through and they may not know exactly what AI is going to do next, but they know it's something,
Yeah.
or they might know the next thing coming. And then you say, okay, let's just prioritize these. This is what I do with the teams. I'll say, okay, prioritize these. Let's pick a few of them. And then say you took one of them, disruption A, and we say, okay,
Hmm.
disruption A, how is that shifting the marketplace? And there's five forces of shift I talk about with them are things like where's power going? Who has more power in this situation? Where's leverage going? How is it shifting customer expectations? So we go through the process of saying, okay, and how is it changing the environment we're working in? And then we
Hmm.
go one step closer to home, which is saying, okay, how is it shifting what we should do internally? Is it shifting how we should organize? Is it shifting how we develop and attract and develop and position talent? Is it shifting how we make decisions differently? So it's kind of like just saying, okay, we don't know what is coming next, but it's an exercise worth doing, which is to spend some time thinking about it and then saying, okay, where might this take the industry and reshape expectations of shareholders and those out in the broader community? And then how's it reshaping the organization we need to lead going forward? And that exercise of just thinking through that with a few things starts to build a new muscle, I think, for
Yeah.
organizations that says to them, I don't know what the next thing is going to be, but we've gone through the process of thinking about how to think about it.
Yeah.
And that's really informative to us.
Yeah, Patrick, that's a great way to break that down and a great example. I think that would be also just super fun, right? As a
Oh,
geek a
it's
little
fun.
bit
Yeah,
myself,
it's fun.
like
Yeah.
that exercise I think would be fascinating to do, right? And going through like your process with a team would be awesome. I'd love to do it someday. Patrick, that is maybe a good way to wrap this conversation to have folks think about, hey, bring this back to your organization. Let's think about how we need to prepare, how we can, and not always be chasing our tails, right? Or not always be that anxiousness, right? That worry that continues.
Not always be reacting.
React
Right, right,
exactly.
right. We want to kind of get out in front of this as best we can. And if nothing else, we might not know the thing, but we can get prepared for the next thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. I totally encourage folks to check out the book, Disrupt Everything and Win, and take control of your future. This was Patrick co-wrote with James Patterson, who's a really cool guy as well. I always tell my James Patterson story every time chance I get. But Patrick, this was super fun. And I'm so glad we were able to take some time today. It was so great to see you after a few months. And hopefully we can check in together in the fall as well. Maybe like 6 months from now or so, check in and see how your travels have been going and what kinds of things. Maybe the world will be turned upside down again 6 months from now, and we can talk about that some.
It will be turned upside down, but we'll just continue to try to stand on solid ground that we can create for
Awesome.
ourselves. But I'd love to do it, Steve. Yeah, let's plan to do that.
I love it. All right, Patrick Leddin, thank you so much for joining us today on the Outwork in America show. Good to see you. I want to thank everybody for listening. Go to hrhappyhour.net for all the show archives. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Check us out on YouTube, blah, 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 all the places. Patrick, thank you. We will see you next time, everybody, and bye for now.